The shovel slid into the earth with a sound like tearing fabric. Elias worked in a steady rhythm, the same rhythm that had governed his life since his parents were taken by the fever 2 years prior. Dig, lift, turn, empty. The sun of late August was hot on his back, but the dirt he turned was curiously warm, releasing a faint mineral scent into the air, a smell of deep time and slow heat. He was digging not down, but wide, clearing a shallow, rectangular depression on the southern face of Whisper Ridge, a place the old maps called the Burning Mountain. His dog, a sturdy shepherd mix named Boro, with eyes the color of burnt amber, lay in the shade of a lone juniper, head on his paws, watching. Boro did not pant from the heat. He seemed to feel the same strange warmth from the ground, a constant, gentle presence that Elias had known since he was a boy exploring these hills with his grandfather. It was a secret the earth kept, one most people had forgotten or dismissed. The work was slow. The patch of land was his, all 20 acres of rock and thin soil willed to him, along with the small, drafty cabin he'd just abandoned. He was 18 years old, with a frame too lean for his height, and hands already gnarled with the work of a man twice his age. He did not stop until the sun began to dip behind the western peaks, casting long, cool shadows. He had cleared an area 40 feet long and 15 feet wide, scraping down about 18 inches to a bed of dark, crumbly shale that radiated a consistent, pleasant warmth, like a hearthstone hours after the fire has died. He laid his palm flat against it. Even through his calluses, the heat was undeniable, a living thing. Boro padded over, sniffed the ground, and then curled up on the warm rock, letting out a soft sigh. "See?" Elias said, his voice raspy from disuse. "It's real." Boro thumped his tail twice against the ground. It was all the confirmation he needed. The next morning, the sound of an approaching wagon broke his concentration. Mr. Gable, his nearest neighbor from 2 miles down the valley, pulled his team to a halt at the edge of the clearing. He was a thick, weathered man whose certainty was etched into the deep lines of his face. He spat a stream of tobacco juice near a sagebrush. "What in God's name are you doing, boy?" Gable asked, his voice a low rumble of disapproval. "Digging your own grave?" Elias straightened his back, feeling the pull in his lower spine. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty hand. "Building," he said. Gable squinted, his gaze sweeping over the shallow pit. "Building what? A root cellar with no roof? You've lost your mind since your folks passed, Elias. It's a shame. You should be down in the valley, shoring up your father's cabin for the winter, not up here digging in this cursed ground." "This is my home," Elias said quietly, his eyes fixed on the foundation he was clearing. "This is a fool's errand," Gable countered, his voice rising. "My father told me stories about this ridge. Ground fire, he called it. Said the coal down deep's been burning for 100 years. Said it's unstable. Poisonous fumes, cave-ins. You think you're the first person to notice the ground is warm? People have sense enough to leave it alone. Wait until winter. Wait until the first big snow, and you're stuck up here in whatever that is you're planning. You'll freeze to death in a week." He shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment. "It's a crazy thing to see." Elias offered no argument. He simply bent back to his work, plunging the shovel into the earth. Arguing was a waste of breath. The proof would be in the structure. Gable watched for another minute, muttered something about stubborn fools, and then snapped the reins, his wagon creaking away down the trail, leaving a small cloud of dust and doubt hanging in the air. That night, by the light of a kerosene lamp in the old, drafty cabin he would soon leave behind, Elias opened his grandfather's journal. It was a thick, leather-bound book, the pages filled with a tidy, looping script. His grandfather had been a surveyor, a man who paid attention to the land in ways others did not. Elias found the page he was looking for, the corner folded down years ago. October 12th, 1878, the entry began. Took temperature readings all day on the south face of Whisper Ridge. Air temperature at dawn, 28 degrees. Ground surface, 59 degrees. 6 inches down, 64 degrees. The slow fire in the coal seam below is not a curse, it is a gift. A constant, predictable engine of heat. It does not rage, it smolders. I have calculated the depth of the seam and the rate of burn. It will outlast us all by 1,000 years. A man who is clever could build upon this warmth. Not a deep foundation to be cracked by the heat, but a shallow one. A floating slab that rests upon it like a raft on a calm lake. He could capture the heat. He could live through any winter. The valley folk call it the burning mountain and fear it. They see a danger. I see a stove that never goes out. Elias traced the words with his finger. A stove that never goes out. He closed the journal, the scent of old paper and leather filling the small cabin. Outside, a cool breeze whispered through the pines, a herald of the coming autumn. He looked at Boro, who was already asleep on the floor, and felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest, as solid and as warm as the ground on Whisper Ridge. He had a plan. The next day he began hauling stones. The work of building the foundation was a meditation in weight and placement. He chose flat, heavy stones from the creek bed that cut through the lower part of his property. Each one was a burden. He would wade into the cold water, find a suitable rock, and heave it onto the small wooden sledge he had built. Boro would watch from the bank, occasionally barking at a stray frog. Then came the long, slow drag up the slope. His muscles screamed, his shoulders burned. He wore grooves into the path, his boots slipping on loose scree. He hauled 217 stones, each one carried with singular focus. He laid them in a bed of mortar he mixed himself from sand, lime, and water, forming a low rectangular wall that outlined the 40 by 15-foot space. He was not building down into the earth, but up from it, just as the journal described. A raft on a calm lake. Inside this perimeter, he laid a bed of sand, leveling it with a long, straight plank of salvaged wood. Then, over the sand, he began placing the floor stones, thinner, flatter slates he prized from an outcropping halfway up the ridge. The work was meticulous, a puzzle of 1,000 pieces. Each stone had to be fitted, leveled, and settled. The sun beat down, and the warmth from the ground rose to meet it, cocooning him in a pocket of steady heat. His hands, already tough, became landscapes of pain. Calluses tore, bled, and healed over thicker than before. At night, he would sit by his small fire, soaking them in hot water and salt, the sting a dull, satisfying ache. Boro would lick the clean bandages he wrapped around them. One afternoon, as he was setting the last of the floor slates, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. It was not Mr. Gable. It was a young woman, Clara, the daughter of the blacksmith. She carried a small wooden bucket. She was known in the town for her quiet demeanor and a perceptive gaze that seemed to miss nothing. She had always been kind to him, offering a small smile when others offered suspicious glances. She stopped a polite distance away. "I saw you working," she said. Her voice was clear and soft. "I was gathering berries up the trail. I thought you might be thirsty." Elias straightened slowly, his back protesting. He hadn't realized how parched he was. "Thank you," he managed to say, walking over to her. She offered him a dipper of cool water from the bucket. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. He drank 3 dippers full, the water trickling down his chin. Unlike the others, she did not look at his work with scorn or pity. Her eyes were filled with a genuine, unclouded curiosity. "What are you building?" she asked. "A home," Elias said, the same answer he had given Gable, but it felt different saying it to her. She looked from the perfectly laid stone floor to the empty space where the walls would be. She could feel the warmth rising from the ground, a soft, invisible current. She pulled her shawl a little tighter in the cooling afternoon breeze, but her feet felt strangely comfortable. "It's warm here," she said, a statement of fact, not a question. "Yes." She nodded, a small, thoughtful gesture. "My father has some old metal sheeting behind the smithy, from the roof of the collapsed livery stable. He says it's scrap." She paused. "He might sell it cheap." Elias looked at her. Gratitude was a foreign emotion, and he struggled to find the words for it. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. She smiled again, then turned and walked away, her form disappearing back into the trees. Elias watched her go, then turned back to his work, a new energy humming in his veins. The world felt a little less lonely. He bought the metal sheeting for $17, nearly all the money he had left. It was corrugated, rusted in places, but sound. This would form the arch of his roof, a Quonset design he had seen in a magazine, prized for its strength and simplicity. Getting the sheets up the ridge was another trial of strength and will. He had to drag them one by one behind the sledge, the metal screeching over the rocks. The days grew shorter. The gold of the aspens turned to a brittle brown. The first dustings of snow appeared on the highest peaks. A frantic energy began to grip the valley below. The sound of axes splitting wood echoed from dawn till dusk. Wagons loaded with supplies rumbled through the town. Winter was coming, and its approach was a palpable threat. Yet Elias's pace remained unchanged, deliberate, steady, persistent. He built the end walls of his structure from the same creek stone as the foundation, mortaring them into a solid, impenetrable barrier. In the south-facing wall, he left openings for a door and 2 small windows. In the north wall, nothing. No quarter would be given to the prevailing wind. Then came the roof. He built a temporary wooden frame, a curved skeleton over which he would lay the metal. With a block and tackle rigged to the tall juniper tree, he hoisted the first sheet into place. It was awkward, heavy work for one man. The metal was unwieldy, its edges sharp. He cut his arms in a dozen places, but slowly, painstakingly, the structure took shape. He overlapped each sheet by a foot and sealed the seams with pine tar he'd rendered himself, creating a single, contiguous shell. From the valley, it looked like a great silver beetle hunkered down on the hillside. Mayor Thompson made a special trip up in his fine buggy, his wife seated beside him, wrapped in a fur stole. He did not get out. He simply stared at the bizarre structure for a long time. "An absolute eyesore," he declared to his wife, loud enough for Elias to hear. "A testament to lunacy. I give him till the first real freeze." Mrs. Gable also came by, bringing a loaf of bread and a thick stew. Her skepticism was softer, laced with genuine concern. "Elias, please," she pleaded, her hands twisting in her apron. "Come down to the valley. You can stay with us. No one can survive a winter in a tin can. You'll catch your death." "I'll be warm, Mrs. Gable," he said, accepting the food with a grateful nod. "I have a plan." She left, shaking her head, her kindness overshadowed by her fear for him. By mid-November, the cabin was complete. It was small, no bigger than the single room of his parents' old home. He built a sturdy door from salvaged barnwood and fitted the windows with thick panes of glass he'd bought with the last of his money. Inside, he built a small, efficient wood stove in one corner, more for cooking and for fighting the initial chill near the walls than for primary heat. The true furnace was the floor. As the outside air temperature dropped into the 40s and then the 30s, the stone floor remained a constant, unwavering 61 degrees. The ambient air inside the well-insulated hut hovered in the high 50s without a fire. With a small blaze in the stove, it was as comfortable as any home in the valley. He moved his few possessions from the old cabin: his parents' bed, a small table and 2 chairs, a trunk of clothes, and his grandfather's journal. The last thing he did was to carve a temperature gauge, a simple notched piece of wood with markings for every 10 degrees, and hang it on the inside wall. He banked the fire in the stove, the gentle warmth from the floor filling the quiet space. Boro was already asleep on the hearthstones, not for the fire, but for the deeper, more ancient heat that rose from the ground. Outside, the wind began to pick up, a low moan that promised violence. The sky turned the color of lead. Elias stood in the doorway and looked out at the valley. He could see the smoke rising from a dozen chimneys, each one a desperate plume against the darkening sky. They were all fighting the cold. He was living with the heat. He closed the door, the latch clicking shut with a sound of finality. He was ready. The first flakes of snow were fat and wet, drifting down lazily in the unnerving calm that precedes a great storm. For a day, it was almost beautiful. A thick white blanket settled over the ridge, muffling all sound, insulating his small home even further. Elias spent the time checking his supplies. He had enough cured meat, flour, and dried beans to last for months. His water barrel, kept inside against the north wall, was full. He had a modest pile of firewood, but he used it sparingly, feeding the stove just enough to keep a small cook fire going. The floor, his silent and tireless furnace, did the rest. The temperature inside the cabin held steady at 61 degrees. Boro dozed, content, his tail occasionally thumping a soft rhythm on the warm stone. By the second night, the character of the storm changed. The wind arrived. It came not as a gust, but as a solid wall of force from the north, a physical presence that slammed into the cabin. The metal roof groaned and hummed, a deep, resonant song of resistance. Snow no longer drifted. It flew horizontally, a blinding torrent of white. Elias looked out his small, south-facing window and saw nothing but a swirling vortex. The world beyond his walls had ceased to exist. He sat at his small table reading his grandfather's journal again, the quiet words a comfort against the storm's loud fury. Down in the valley, it was a different story. The wind, funneled by the mountains, became a battering ram. It found every crack in every cabin. It tore shingles from roofs and rattled window panes until they shattered. The snow began to pile in tremendous drifts, burying wood piles, blocking doors, and making travel between houses impossible. The temperature, which had hovered in the low 20s, began a terrifying descent. By the third day, it was 5 degrees below zero. By the fourth, it was 17 below. The old-timers would later call it the Great White Hurricane, a storm outside of memory or experience. Mr. Gable fought to keep his home warm. He and his wife stuffed rags into the window frames, but the cold crept in like a thief. His massive wood pile, which he had thought would last until March, was dwindling at an alarming rate. The sheer ferocity of the cold demanded a constant, roaring fire. On the morning of the 5th day, the wind tore the chimney cap from his roof. Sparks ignited the dry shingles, and he spent a terrifying hour on the icy roof, beating out the flames with a wet blanket, the wind threatening to peel him off and send him flying into the white abyss. When he finally got back inside, shivering and half frozen, he knew they were losing. Mayor Thompson's fine, large house with its new glass windows proved to be a fortress of ice. A pane in the parlor burst inward, showering the room with frigid air and snow. They boarded it up, but it was too late. The cold had its foothold. His pipes froze, then burst, flooding the kitchen with water that quickly turned to a slick, dangerous sheet of ice. His wife cried, huddled under a mountain of quilts in their bedroom, the only room they could keep moderately warm. Their supply of firewood, meant for aesthetics as much as heat, was nearly gone. Throughout the valley, the story was the same. The community was isolated, each family locked in a desperate, losing battle against an enemy that could not be fought, only endured. And endurance was failing. The cold was relentless, seeping through the thickest logs, stealing the heat from the biggest fires. It was a cold that felt personal, malevolent. It was a cold that killed. On the 6th day, the wind finally lessened, though the snow continued to fall, and the temperature bottomed out at a soul-crushing 26 degrees below zero. Mr. Gable burned the last of his firewood. The fire in his hearth dwindled to a bed of pale, dying embers. The temperature inside their home began to plummet. He could see his breath. His wife was wrapped in every blanket they owned, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. He looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, and knew that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. There was only one place to go, one insane, desperate hope. He bundled himself in every layer of clothing he possessed and forced his front door open against a massive drift. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He began the grueling 2-mile trek up to Whisper Ridge, wading through snow that was waist-deep, sometimes chest-deep. The world was an alien landscape of white, the familiar landmarks gone, buried. He navigated by the shape of the hills, by instinct, by a single flickering image in his mind. A young fool digging in the warm earth. He fell a dozen times. His beard froze solid. His lungs burned with every breath, but he kept going. When he finally saw the low, curved shape of the metal roof, barely visible above the drifts, he almost wept with relief. A thin tendril of smoke rose from its stovepipe, a sign of life. He stumbled the last 100 yards, collapsing against the sturdy wooden door and pounding on it with his frozen fist. The door swung open. Elias stood there, bathed in the soft, warm light from within. He was wearing a simple wool shirt, his sleeves rolled up. Behind him, Boro lifted his head and gave a lazy thump of his tail. The air that washed over Gable was not hot or stuffy. It was a gentle, life-giving warmth. He stared, speechless, at the impossible comfort before him. "Mr. Gable," Elias said, his voice calm, "you look cold." Gable could only nod, his jaw too frozen to form words. Elias stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." Gable stumbled inside, his wife following close behind him, half carried, half dragged through the snow. The moment they crossed the threshold, the warmth enveloped them. It was the most profound sensation of relief Gable had ever known. It wasn't the heat of a fire. It was the heat of the earth itself, rising through the soles of his boots, through the stone floor, a deep and abiding warmth that seemed to thaw him from the inside out. He looked around the small, simple cabin. It was clean, orderly, and unbelievably, miraculously warm. He sank to his knees on the stone floor, laying his palms flat against it, just as Elias had done months before. The gentle, steady heat was real. Within the hour, more came. The blacksmith and Clara arrived, their faces masks of bluish ice. Then Mayor Thompson and his wife, their fine clothes tattered, their arrogance stripped away by the cold. Family by family, the desperate survivors of the valley made their way to the strange silver hut on the hill. Elias took them all in, the small cabin filled with shivering bodies, with the quiet, awe-struck murmurs of people who had stepped from the mouth of hell into a pocket of inexplicable grace. There were 15 of them in the small space, yet it was not crowded. It was a sanctuary. Elias moved among them with a quiet competence that belied his age. He heated broth on the small stove, handing out steaming mugs. He checked for frostbite, his touch gentle as he examined blackened fingers and pale, waxy cheeks. He applied salves and clean bandages to the cuts and abrasions people had suffered on their journey. He spoke little, but his presence was a calming anchor in their sea of fear. He was no longer the town fool, he was their savior. They huddled together, sharing blankets and body heat, but the true comfort came from the floor. They sat on it, lay on it, pressed their frozen limbs against its constant miraculous warmth. The temperature inside never wavered from 61 degrees. Outside, the world was a frozen wasteland, but inside Elias's cabin, life was possible. Mr. Gable sat on the floor near the door, his back against the stone wall. He watched Elias tending to the mayor's wife, wrapping her frost-bitten hands. He watched the quiet, unassuming boy he had mocked and ridiculed move with a purpose and wisdom that humbled him to his core. All his experience, all his conventional knowledge of how to survive a winter had failed him. It had all been proven worthless against the storm. But the boy's crazy idea, his quiet persistence in the face of everyone's doubt, had worked. Elias finished his task and came to sit near Gable, offering him a mug of broth. Their eyes met. The silence stretched between them, filled with the humming of the wind outside and the soft breathing of the people within. "It worked," Gable said, his voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat. "You were right." It was not just an admission, it was an apology. It was a surrender. Elias simply nodded. "Drink," he said. "You need to get warm." The storm finally broke on the 8th day. The sun rose into a sky of impossible blue, reflecting off a world buried in 12 feet of snow. When the people emerged from the small Quonset hut, blinking in the brilliant light, they saw their world transformed. But the greater transformation was within them. They looked at the unassuming metal structure not as an eyesore, but as a monument. They looked at Elias not as a strange, orphaned boy, but as the man who had saved them. They had come to his door seeking shelter from the cold, and they had found it. But they had also found a new kind of wisdom, a lesson in humility, patience, and the quiet power of a single unconventional idea. The winter of the Great White Hurricane was remembered for the lives it almost took, and for the young man who showed everyone another way to live. In the years that followed, the valley was never the same. Elias's Quonset hut became a permanent winter shelter, a place of pilgrimage and learning. The next autumn, Mr. Gable and 3 other families, under Elias's quiet guidance, built their own geothermal cabins on the warm slope of Whisper Ridge. They used his methods, followed the principles laid out in his grandfather's journal, which Elias now shared freely. The phrases, "a stove that never goes out," and "a raft on a calm lake" entered the local lexicon. Mockery was replaced by a deep and abiding respect. He never boasted. He never said, "I told you so." He simply showed them how. He taught them to listen to the earth. Clara became a constant presence at his side. Theirs was a bond forged not in grand declarations, but in shared work and quiet understanding. They married in the autumn 2 years after the great storm. Their wedding held in the meadow below the ridge, the entire valley in attendance. They lived together in the small cabin, which they expanded over the years, adding a second arched structure connected by a short stone hallway. It was a home filled with a quiet, steady warmth, both from the ground below and the love within. Time passed as it always does, measured in seasons of snow and sun. Boro grew old. His muzzle turned gray, his amber eyes clouded with age. He moved slower, his joints stiff, but he was never far from Elias's side. One mild spring morning, 17 years after the Great White Hurricane, Boro did not wake from his sleep. He had died peacefully on his favorite spot on the warm stone floor. Elias carried his old friend's body outside and buried him on a small knoll overlooking the cabin, beneath the shade of the old juniper. He carved a simple stone marker, Boro, a good dog, a true witness. Decades melted away. The small settlement at the base of Whisper Ridge grew. The original cabins were joined by others, and the community developed a unique architecture, a way of life dictated by the warm earth. Elias and Clara raised 2 children, teaching them the importance of listening, observing, and trusting the quiet wisdom of the natural world. Elias became the town elder, a man of few words but immense stature. His hands were permanently gnarled, his back bent from a lifetime of labor, but his eyes remained clear and patient. When he was an old man of 78, the town built a large communal winter house, a great Quonset hall built over the warmest part of the coal seam, capable of sheltering the entire population. It was a testament to his legacy, a permanent safeguard against the fury of winter. Elias stood at the dedication ceremony, his hand in Clara's, and watched as the children of the people he had saved played on the warm stone floors. He died in his sleep a few years later, in the same bed, in the same cabin he had built with his own 2 hands. He was buried on the knoll next to Boro, under the juniper tree. The whole town, hundreds of people, climbed the ridge to pay their respects. Clara lived for 5 more years, tending to his memory and the legacy they had built together, before being laid to rest beside him. A new grave marker was placed, a single slab of granite for the 2 of them, and for the dog who had been there from the beginning. The townspeople debated what to carve on it. They considered listing his accomplishments, his titles, his deeds. In the end, they chose a single line, taken from the faded ink of his grandfather's journal, the sentence that had started it all. It read simply, "The earth gives freely to those who listen." The original cabin still stands. It is a landmark now, a museum. The metal has weathered to a soft pewter gray. The stones are covered in moss. But if you go there, even on the coldest day of winter, and you lay your hand upon the floor, you can still feel it. A gentle, constant, and unwavering warmth, rising up from the heart of the world.